Mr. Hockey, Don Cherry, getting blasted by mainstream media for this.
You people that are against fighting, you should be ashamed of yourself. You took advantage of that to make your point on fighting. You should be ashamed of yourself doing something like that. But the ones that I am really disgusted with, and I hate to say this when the kids are listening, what George LaRocque said about the bunch of pukes that fought before Stu Grimson, Chris Nyland, and Jim Thompson, the reason that they're drinking drugs and alcoholics because they fight. You turncoats, you hypocrites.
Is there anybody who embodies Canada more than Don Cherry? Icon of our national sport, solely responsible for the most entertaining 10 minutes in all of CBC's programming. Now, look, I don't agree with everything the guy's got to say, but unlike the mainstream media, I'm not calling for his career to end as soon as he says something I don't agree with. I don't ask the CBC to add tape delays on Coach's Corner. That's the great thing about TVs. You can turn them off whenever you want to. So who are the real pukes? Why do people demonize the snappy, hilarious Canadian patriot? It's time for some Menzoid Monday, and David Menzies joins us from Toronto. David, you're a big Cherry fan, aren't you? Always have been?
I love Don Cherry, I'll tell you, Charles. And what I find so sad about this, it's another example in a long list of examples. You see it on academic campuses these days, where when you have a contrary opinion, a politically incorrect opinion, an opinion that is against what the chattering classes are espousing, well, it's not so much we're going to debate you, it's not so much we're going to disagree with you openly and engage a discussion. No, we're going to shut you down. We're going to prevent you from espousing your opinion. And this is the worst part of it all, Charles. We are going to economically penalize you. Ergo, we're going to take the microphone away from you. We're going to take the pen or the typewriter away from you and silence you. And I'm just wondering how it came to be in a great democracy like Canada, we have come into this kind of a totalitarian attitude when it comes to those we disagree with.
All right, David, look, Cherry's major problem is not what he says. It's the platform. It's carried by the CBC. The people who run the CBC don't like him, can't stand him, love the people who criticize him, but they can't get rid of him because he's too popular. He makes them too much money. And it makes, I have some sympathy for the CBC executives. They feel like whores. They don't believe in what they're doing, but they're dropping their drawers anyway. They're down around their ankles. And who wants to feel like a harlot?
Oh, Charles, the hypocrisy here is... It is really something to see. I'm going back about 5 or 6 years ago. If you recall, Charles, there was that escapade where Don Cherry said something along the lines of, let's support our troops in Afghanistan. And wore his patriotism on his sleeve. Well, for that, that didn't go over well at Mother Corp, Charles. After that, he was put on an 8-second time delay. And here's the funny thing. They tried to justify it by saying, well, he's a sportscaster. He's not supposed to get into politics. That's not what he's hired for. But, Charles, I bet you my bottom dollar, if Don Cherry had come out and questioned the mission, and booed the Canadian Armed Forces overseas, there would be no problem at all with the Birkenstock Brigade down at the CBC.
Well, Menzoid, I got to tell you, the CBC almost never makes me laugh. But they did on the weekend. And it was their press release. In their press release, the CBC stated that Don Cherry doesn't speak for them. No shoot, Sherlock. No kidding. Don Cherry doesn't speak for the CBC. But here's what I find even stranger about this. And I'm trying really, really hard to use my imagination here. I'm trying to use my imagination and beam myself into, CBC, the Front Street Cathedral, and imagine that I'm one of their commentators. Like I said, I've got to really strain to imagine that. But if I'm one of their commentators and the CBC is putting out this stuff about how Don Cherry's views don't represent theirs, and they're not doing it on any other commentator, I'm going to make the assumption that the folks watching me think that I do and the CBC do. We're both on the same plane, and I'm speaking for the CBC. And I can't imagine, as a person who wants to be a free man in the free world, I can't imagine a worse piece of baggage, a worse albatross to carry. I mean, would you want to spend the rest of your life being thought of as someone who speaks for the CBC?
I never thought about that, Charles. It would have to be a nice, hefty paycheck, I'll tell you. And at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. Business is business. As you said earlier, Don Cherry's Coach's Corner is the 10 most watched minutes in Canada. And it's a cash cow for the CBC. But, you know, let's look at, you know, beyond his comments on Stu Grimson and Jim Thompson and Chris Nyland. And maybe he's right and maybe he's wrong. That's not the issue. The idea of painting this man as some kind of, you know, Neanderthal, some kind of dinosaur from hockey's dark old days, it just doesn't wash. He's the guy, Charles, that has been campaigning for no-touch icing for years and years, and it might be coming in the next season or two. And that's, you know, where you have guys ending their careers prematurely because they're chasing a puck on an icing call. He was also instrumental in getting, you know, the stop sign icon on the back of minor hockey sweaters to, you know, warn other players that don't, you know, cross-check somebody into the boards. That can lead to a major spinal injury. And he's bang on about his criticism about equipment. Charles, if you go to a sports equipment store these days, you should see some of the RoboCop equipment in terms of shoulder pads and elbow pads that they're selling these days. This is one of the most instrumental things causing those horrible injuries like we saw with Sidney Crosby.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the stuff these guys are now wearing, I mean, I don't know whether our troops in Afghanistan have stuff as tough as this. And obviously, it makes a difference. I mean, first of all, you're hit by a big guy coming at you with speed, but he's wearing what, for all intents and purposes, is a brick wall. So it does become like being hit by a truck, and clearly you're going to get injuries and et cetera, et cetera. But this is just, to me, that part is just Canadian common sense. What I find interesting about all of this, and and maybe I'm too focused on this, is if the CBC really had any convictions, why don't they just cut him loose? And I'm not worried about Cherry getting a platform. He'll get lots of platforms. It's called the private sector.
Oh, absolutely. But Charles, a business is business. This is our Canadian broadcaster, and yet what kind of advertisements do you see on bus shelters and TTC vehicles? But, you know, placards for Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy. It's about bringing in the money. At least they realize, where they're getting the jam for their toast. But I just want to say to Don Cherry, don't let this criticism get to you. I'm going to do a real Don Cherry thing, Charles. I'm wearing a Don Cherry kind of tie. See, this is Don Cherry here. He's the Superman of the CBC. He's in a bizarro world full of milquetoast Clark Kents. And this is the one guy who calls it like he sees it. And hey, maybe he's wrong sometimes. So what? Why do we want to silence him? He's entertaining, he's knowledgeable, and he's great. And God bless Don Cherry.
They're such doofuses. I mean, they really are. Instead of worrying about what some, predictable left-wing usual suspects write about, I mean, some of these people who are criticized don't even like hockey. Never mind roughness and hockey. They don't like hockey. So instead of the CBC worrying about seeking, the approval of the ballet crowd, all they would have to do is say, okay, what is it about Don Cherry that works really well? Why do we get huge numbers with him? Maybe we ought to hire other people who are more spontaneous, more in touch with Canadian values. But no, they won't go there. They'll put out press releases saying he's not really meeting our standards. We have to apologize for having him there. There are a bunch of Neanderthals in Canada, and we're just doing a public service for the Neanderthals. I want to thank you so much, David, for the Don Cherry tie and for the commentary as always.
Thank you so much, Charles. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family and everyone else in what you call Rich Man Hill.